Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Anchorage Assembly to order. Madam Clerk, as members find their seats, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Butch? Mr. Butch is joining us on the phone. Dr. Selkrig? Here. Mrs. Drummond?
Present.
Ms. Johnston?
Here.
Mr. Flynn?
Present.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Here.
Ms. Gray Jackson? Honored to be here. Mr. Clayman?
Here.
Mr. Starr?
Here.
Ms. Osiander? Mr. Coffey?
Here. Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Selkrig, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do have minutes from the previous meeting, for the special meeting of December 8th.
Move the minutes of the special meeting of December 8th.
Second.
Are there any objections or corrections to the minutes? Seeing and hearing none, those are approved. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No major report today other than over the weekend. Yesterday, I had the privilege of being able to present a mayoral proclamation at the Martin Luther King Jr. Day celebration at the Mountain View Recreation Center. And a nice event, nice turnout, and I was honored to be there and participate. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Okay, for the Chair's report, just a few items for this evening's agenda I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. On item 9, Foxtrot 5, 9F5, the public hearing that's scheduled for the 16th will be delayed to the 2nd of March. Items 11A and 13A, which deal with fiscal reporting, we're going to delay both of those to February 16. And finally, item 14A, the ID check for package stores, will be continuing that public hearing to February 2nd. So people who wish to comment on that tonight may. However, I suspect we'll be seeing a substitute version, and so if you'd like to wait until that's on the table and comment on that, you're welcome to do so. But you only get to comment one to the other.
We didn't hear you on the second of those two. Oh, I got 9-5.
9F5, the public hearing delayed to March 2nd. Items 11A and 13A to February 16, and item 14A to February 2.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. 11A would be a non-public hearing item, and
Correct.
13 would be a public, so you're going to change both of those that way?
That is correct.
All right. And then 14A was the other one?
Right, to February 2nd.
So we'll have a public.
14A is February 2nd.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Osiander, you're in the queue. Was that what you had it or something else?
I wanted clarification, and I got that, but I'd also like to ask if there's no objection from the body, could Mr. Starr be added as a co-sponsor under item F6? And if there's no objection, maybe I don't have to pull it.
Seeing and hearing no objection, we'll make that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we're on to the committee reports. We'll start with you, Mr. Coffey, Title 21.
Yeah, I have two matters. Title 21 has got a new lengthy agenda out that hopefully keeps us online through the 13th of April to get all but Eagle River and the reserve sections done. Tonight we have 2107, 090, and 100. I'll just note early that 100 is the lighting. We will reserve that section because on the committee recommendation based on the fact that they are writing a national code for lighting, and we thought it would behoove us to find out what they have to say in their wisdom before we start putting our own wisdom in place. So that will be that. We continue on Thursday tomorrow with Thursday, with continuing meetings out at the Permit Center, and that will be on, the subject on this coming Thursday will be, it's the 21st. We'll spend an hour on snow storage and then continue a discussion on commercial design standards. Mr. Chairman, that's that. I wanted to report also on the Energy Task Force. The legislation entitled GRETC comes before us tomorrow at 9 to 11. GRETC is a brainchild of the Alaska Energy Authority, intended to bring the utilities in the rail belt from Homer and Seward up to Fairbanks together. There have been Mr. Posey and others, executive directors and presidents and so on, and board members have been in negotiations of hours of length, and recently, because Mr. Strandberg, who is AEA's man, has said they want to have a committee substitute on February 1, which is basically 10 days hence. And so there's a lot of heat and going on, and hopefully after tomorrow we'll be able to give you some light in addition to the heat. It's a very, very important decision that this municipality will have to make, and the mayor's been engaged, and I'm sure he can tell you about that, and his task force has been engaged, and I would urge any assembly members who have interest in that particular piece of legislation to attend tomorrow's meeting, 9 to 11, Mayor's Conference Room, or talk to me at any time, and I'll be happy to give you the briefing to the extent that I have the understanding of what's going on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Dr. Selkirk, you had a question on that topic?
I just have a question, Mr. Coffey. Would it be appropriate at some point for us to have a work session on this? I mean, it's a little bit of short notice, and I know it's important, but would there be a point at which the body could be generally informed with what you're doing?
I would certainly await sort of the actions of the executive from the state and the local level, because the committee substitute bill in February will be sort of what's in front of Lisa McGuire, Wilikowski, Sharice Millett, and the legislature. And perhaps at that point in time we might have it, because they're certainly going to do whatever they do to it, which will undoubtedly result in some changes different than what actually goes in as they go through their process. So maybe at that point in time, the legislative committee could convene a work session and give you our best views, along with maybe anything else you want to know from Wendy and Matt down as our lobbyist. We might, I don't know how we'll handle it, but Mr. Flynn and I can talk about it in that context.
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of its importance, just kind of at some point getting caught up on some of the details would be great. And whenever you think that's appropriate, I'd be interested.
Like I said, anytime you want my understanding, I'm happy to give it, and anytime the chairman wants a work session on it, we can certainly do it. It's very fluid. I mean, everybody says that it's moving back and forth this way and that. There's 6 utilities. Each has a different set of circumstances and a different interest, and it's very, I don't know what's going to come out tomorrow and the day after and February 1. We'll find out a little bit more tomorrow.
Thank you.
Ms. Osiander?
I just invite members of this body and members of the public. The Eagle River Chamber luncheon tomorrow will feature a speaker from the National Marine Fisheries on the beluga whale situation.
Thank you. Mr. Starr?
I have 2 reports. Elections, it's my intention to put out sort of a summary email this week in conjunction with Barbara, the clerk, on the status of the elections coordination and the elections upcoming with staffing and that requirement. So you should see a joint email come out this week on an update for that. Ethics has an opening. There was a resignation. I think we all got emailed to that. So we'll be looking at applications for that. And that's a unique position in that the chair of the Ethics Committee on the Assembly actually has oversight on the appointment, not in a selection perception, but the administration provides data as to who they intend to appoint. In the past, all I've done is make sure they understand the ethics code, and then I link them with Julia, who's the ethics, what they call ethics officer, so that will be the case. So there's unlikely to be any sort of committee meetings formally for the elections or ethics, but those 2 topics are ongoing. So thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. I think, just for clarification, I believe Ms. Westover is actually our municipal ethics officer. But she, of course, works very closely with Ms. Tucker. Mr. Clayman.
Public Safety Committee met, I can't remember, I think it was last week, to talk about the proposal to have mandatory ID checks in liquor stores, and that's up tonight, but I expect we're going to postpone action until March 2nd. In addition, there's several things on the bond proposals involving Sand Lake Ambulance and kind of the general, and it raises a question about general ambulance needs throughout the municipality, and so I'm going to call a Public Safety Committee meeting. I think the good date is January 28th, which is a Thursday. I was going to do Wednesday, but then I realized we have the AEDC luncheon, so for scheduled for 1 hour Public Safety Committee on January 28th, Thursday, to At noon, yes. The clerk is reminding me to have a time, and that would not be midnight. And that's all. Thank you. Oh, and then there's, actually, I'll just make a quick note so that we don't have to pull it. I did introduce a resolution joined by the mayor's office, and I took the privilege of adding all members of the assembly, which is 9B4, regarding recognizing both the reprehensible injury to Officer Allen as well as the general support for all our police officers, and this is a recognition that I think the community is really outraged and that we really want to show our support, not just for Officer Allen, but for every police officer in the field that takes their life in their own hands when they go protect our community. And so Resolution 9B4, unless someone else pulls it, I'm just, I wasn't planning to pull it at this point, but we may review that during the next several minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Clement. Mr. Coffey?
Yeah, I had a question, Mr. Clayman. I understood that a remark was made by you relative to the authorization by the state in the licensing and the identification check that the state had specifically authorized adoption of some municipal provisions. My question is, did I hear you correctly? And if so, I would like to know that citation so I can look it up and read it.
My understanding is that
Gentlemen, if I can just gently, briefly, perhaps it'd be a better topic to take up offline.
Fine.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the pleasure, along with Mr. Clayman, of attending the annual MLK celebration on Sunday at the PAC. It was a really, really wonderful and inspiring event. There were over 700 people in the audience, and quite frankly, I haven't felt that motivated and excited since I got elected to office. It was just remarkable. And also, I had the opportunity to read and present the resolution that this body approved some months ago, so it was pretty awesome. Now to my report. The Audit Committee met last Friday and reviewed the internal auditor's annual plan, and after several recommendations, the committee voted to endorse the plan and recommend that the body accept the plan. I also distributed copies of the engagement letter for our 2009 audit from the auditors, and we had a little bit of discussion that kind of followed up on some of the discussion that we had last week in terms of when the audit needed to be completed. And quite frankly, the code and the charter provides that the audit shall be completed within 90 days following the close of the fiscal year. And what I recommend that we do, because we've done it in the past, and a previous attorney said that it was okay to do, is to make sure that we put a letter to record saying that, quite frankly, we're not going to be able to have it completed, just so that there's a record. But our finances have grown immensely since the charter provision was put in place, and also the code. So we may want to consider somewhere along the line, and maybe in April, of changing both the charter and the code to reflect a more realistic date of completion for our financial audit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Mr. Gutierrez?
No report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston?
This month's Finance Committee has been canceled and will meet in March. Thank you.
Not February?
I skipped a month in February.
I don't mind. I'm just asking. Ms. Drummond?
Nothing to report, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Selkirk, sorry.
The Community and Economic Development Housing Working Group met, and they're in the process currently of going out and vetting their findings and their observations with the mortgage industry, with banks, with the realtors in the community, with the home builders to get their feedback on it. And they'll be bringing, once they've taken that information in, they'll reevaluate what they've got. They're also working with the administration in terms of making sure that the administration is clear about what they're going to be proposing, and they'll be bringing it back to us for some action items.
Well, thank you, Dr. Selkirk. We have now reached the consent agenda. Mr. Gutierrez?
Move to incorporate.
You meant the addendum, correct? And the later on the table items? Yes. Okay. This is the part where we get to read for a while, ladies and gentlemen, so if you have something else to do, please feel free. On the addendum, item 9, Delta 3, Assembly Memorandum 49-2010, change order number 4 to Construction Unlimited Incorporated for additional costs incurred during the finalization of the Lower Fire Lake Dam rehabilitation, PM&E Contract 99-31, Contract C-260899, $19,694.54. Item 9, Foxtrot 2, Bravo, Assembly Memorandum AM 40-2010A, an ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of the issuance of not to exceed $1.150 million of general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay the cost of fire protection capital improvements in the Anchorage Fire Service area, and an election to be held at the municipality on April 6, 2010, by a Finance Committee public hearing on February 2, 2010. Item F11, ordinance number AO 2010-9, ordinance providing for the submission to the qualified voters of Anchorage, Alaska, the question of issuance of not to exceed $250,000 in general obligation bonds of the municipality of Anchorage to pay for the cost of public safety improvements and related capital improvements, and the question of an increase in the municipal tax cap limitation to pay associated operations and maintenance costs at the election to be held in the municipality on April 6, 2010, public hearing on February 2, 2010. That is the Sand Lake Ambulance, and there's also an Assembly Memorandum accompanying that, AM 50-2010. 9, Foxtrot 12, ordinance number AO 2010-10, ordinance submitting to the qualified voters of the municipality of Anchorage at the regular municipal election on April 6, 2010, a ballot proposition authorizing an equal value land exchange of 2.77 acres of municipal land, including 1.9 acres of municipal land of dedicated parks land in Sisterhood Park, in exchange for 2.73 acres of municipal land in Tract 5, Bravo 1, Crossroads Business Park Subdivision, Department of Law, public hearing February 2, 2010, accompanied by Assembly Memorandum AM 51-2010. Item 9, Foxtrot 13, and Ordinance 2010-11, submitted to the qualified voters residing in the Mountain Park/Robin Hill Limited Road Service area at the regular municipal election on April 6, 2010, a ballot proposition to delete the requirement for a Sun Valley Heights board member, convert the LRSA to a rural road service area, and amend Anchorage Municipal Code sections 27.20.280 and 27.30.360, retroactive to January 1, 2010. Public hearing on that will be also February 2, 2010, accompanied by Assembly Memorandum 52-2010. And 9, Foxtrot 14, ordinance number AO 2010-12, an ordinance of the municipality of Anchorage authorizing and providing for the borrowing of not to exceed $11,219,000 from the from the State of Alaska Clean Water Fund for the purpose of financing a portion of the costs associated with landfill capital improvement projects at the Anchorage Regional Landfill and providing for related matters. Public hearing on that is also on February 2, 2010, with accompanied by Memorandum AM 53-2010. George, you're going to pay for this. Item 9, Alpha 2, Resolution 2010-19, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Krista and Julian Brailsford. 9, Bravo 4, a resolution, AR 2010-20, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly supporting law enforcement efforts to apprehend those responsible for the shooting of Anchorage police officer Jason Allen, recognizing community efforts and assistance, and acknowledging the sacrifice made by law enforcement officers and their families. This is the thing that Mr. Clayman referenced earlier. 9, Foxtrot 15, ordinance number 2010-13, arts of ballot proposition. This is being submitted by Ms. Ray Jackson. I presume the public hearing on this will also take place on February 2nd. 9, Foxtrot 16, ordinance AO 2010-14, fire service area ballot proposition by Assemblymember Clayman. This is another version of the Sand Lake ambulance issue and will also be heard on February 2nd. And finally, 9, Foxtrot 17, ordinance number 2010-15, an advisory ballot proposition by Ms. Gray Jackson, Ms. Drummond, and Mr. Gutierrez. We'll hear that also on February 2nd, 2002. Are there any other, and there better not be, items to be laid on the table this evening? Hearing and seeing none. Is there any objection to incorporating those items into the addendum, into the consent agenda? Hearing and seeing none, the consent agenda is before us. Dr. Selcraig, you can start by telling us what you want to pull, if anything.
I'd like to pull 9E1 on the main agenda, and I'd like to postpone that until our February second meeting, just to give people an opportunity to provide comments to us. I've had a fair number of calls today, and
We'll take that motion up when we get
Thank
to it,
you.
if you don't mind. Anything else? No? Ms. Drummond?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there's anyone present from the family of Krista and Julia Brailsford, I'd like to pull Resolution 9A2. Are they here? Is anybody here?
Don't be shy. Okay,
No.
looks like no, so
Okay.
we'll leave that in there then? Not
Thank
pull it? Okay. Ms. Johnston?
Nothing, thank you.
I'll be pulling item 9 Delta 1 to declare a conflict of interest. Mr. Gutierrez.
No items, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Ms. Gray Jackson.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. Mr. Clayman.
Thank you. I would pull item 9B4 from the laid on the table items.
Thank you, Mr. Clayman. Mr. Starr.
No items.
Ms. Osiander.
On the regular agenda, 9A1.
Thank you, Ms. Osiander. Mr. Coffey.
Nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Mr. Birch, I apologize, I missed you on committee reports too, so you can double up if you want to. Thank you, Mr. Birch, and my apologies. Okay, I'll quickly go over those, make sure we have them all.
Yeah, we have an item to pull.
Oh, yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to pull item 9B, Bravo 1.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anything else?
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, real quickly, we have 9 Alpha 1, 9 Bravo 1, 9 Delta 1, 9 Echo 1, and 9 Bravo 4 from the laid on the table items. Did I miss anything? Okay, with that, Ms. Osiander. Oh,
Move
sorry,
to
I apologize, Ms. Osiander, I skipped one step. We need the motion to approve first.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Is there any objection to approving the consent agenda items other than those that have been pulled? Seeing and hearing none, we're done with that. Now, Ms. Osiander, my apologies.
Move to approve Resolution 2010-10.
Second.
Is there any objection to that item? Seeing and hearing none, Mr. Morrow, would you please come down?
This is a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly and Mayor Dan Sullivan recognizing and honoring Craig Morrow for his 36 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Craig Morrow has excelled in his public service career, which began in January of 1974, when he was first hired by the Greater Anchorage Area Borough working at the Bering Street Equipment Maintenance Shop. And whereas during the summer of 1974, Craig was assigned to the Borough Road Maintenance Crew, where he remained for 36 years through the unification of the borough and the city of Anchorage. And whereas during Craig's career, he served under 9 administrations, which include Mayors Roderick, George Sullivan, Knowles, Fink, Mystrom, Wirch, Begich, Clayman, and Dan Sullivan. And whereas Craig worked through the 1970s as a heavy equipment operator in all phases of summer and winter maintenance activities, and by the 1980s had developed a work ethic and knowledge of Anchorage roads that clearly defined him as an exceptional employee. And whereas during the mid-1980s, Craig was assigned to a special project to survey and map all municipal roads and drainage structures in the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service area. And whereas, after 2 years of field surveys, Craig then worked in assisting Public Works Department digitalizing the data into a database of roads and drainage system maps that are still used today. And whereas in the following years, Craig played a key role in developing and implementing numerous maintenance projects at the Street Maintenance Department, including the Recycled Asphalt Program, as well as design and development of a series of training and safety videos specific to street maintenance activities that are key to employee development today. And whereas Craig's career and long commitment to public safety and excellence led Craig to being named the 2008 Devin Branham Memorial Safety Award winner. And whereas Craig Morrow has an extensive historical knowledge of Anchorage roads and drainage systems that will be greatly missed. And whereas Craig has cared passionately about street maintenance, his co-workers, and making Anchorage a better place to live, and after 36 years will retire on January 21st, 2010. And whereas Craig Morrow, also known as Commander, who is rightly named by his friends and co-workers within street maintenance, will be greatly missed. Now therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves. The Anchorage Municipal Assembly and Mayor Dan Sullivan recognize and honor Craig Morrow for his 36 years of effective, professional, and dedicated public service in the Street Maintenance Division in the Municipality of Anchorage and to the citizens of Anchorage. This resolution shall be effective immediately upon passage and approval this day by the Anchorage Assembly. Congratulations, sir.
Mr. Morrow, you don't have to run away. If you have a few words of wisdom you wish to share, you're more than welcome.
I want to thank my co-workers that showed up, took time off to come to this thing, especially the guys that work the night shift. Co-workers and my fellow supervisors also. I tell you, it's been a good career. I have no fault for what I did. I could have went to pipelines, but I saw this was a better future, and I'm glad I did it. I really love this city. Look right there. I have written motions about retiring, but it tastes good, so I'm going to try.
All right. Seeing that we didn't have anybody here from the Brailsford family, we'll move on to 9 Bravo 1.
Move to postpone indefinitely?
Can I get a second? Mr. Mayor, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, there is scheduled hearings here in Anchorage, and when we first prepared this, that wasn't known, and now that it is known that there will be hearings here, there's no need for the resolution. So I appreciate the motion, and we support it.
Point of order. Generally, you have to bring something forward first before you move to postpone it.
Point well made.
Thank you.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Move to approve?
Second.
Move to postpone indefinitely.
Oh, yeah. Let's get a few buttons cut up here. Whenever you're ready, Madam Clerk. Is there objection to the motion to postpone indefinitely? Seeing and hearing none, we are on to 9 Delta. Oh, sorry. We have 9 Bravo 4. Mr. Clayman.
A move to approve.
Mr. Clayman.
I just pulled this because I was urged by colleagues that we should read this into the record, so I'll be happy to do so.
Seeing no objection, Mr. Clayman, please go ahead.
This is a resolution number AR 2010-20, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly supporting law enforcement efforts to apprehend those responsible for the shooting of Anchorage police officer Jason Allen, recognizing community efforts and assistance and acknowledging the sacrifice made by law enforcement officers and their families. Whereas our community is shaken by the drive-by shooting of Anchorage police officer Jason Allen in the early morning hours of January 9, 2010, as he was seated in his patrol car completing paperwork during his shift. And whereas at a recent press briefing, Mayor Sullivan said that when a police officer is attacked, our entire community is attacked. And whereas the Alaska State Troopers, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Seattle Police Department, and other agencies are assisting the Anchorage Police Department in investigating this shooting. And whereas our community is also rallying to assist in recovery from these events, and some examples include the Anchorage Police Department Employees Association offer of a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the shooter, which has been matched by the Mayor's office. A local bingo parlor business operator has donated $10,000 to a fund benefiting Officer Jason Allen and his family. A drinking and dancing establishment in Spenard has hosted a fundraiser featuring local bands, and the Anchorage Education Association has contributed to the reward and family funds. And whereas our community is hopeful in Officer Jason Allen's anticipated recovery from the serious inflicted injuries, thanks in part to his sheer will and his bulletproof vest. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly hereby resolves the municipality of Anchorage recognizes the sacrifices Anchorage police officers and their families make in serving our community. We are proud of our police department, represented most recently in the events surrounding Officer Jason Allen, who is one of many Anchorage police officers who serve our community. The law enforcement support and community support toward Officer Jason Allen's recovery and the apprehension of those responsible for this crime are testaments to the strength of our community and make all of Anchorage proud. We take this occasion to thank the local law enforcement officers and families who support our community, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 19th day of January 2010. And what I would ask, Mr. Chair, if you could sign a version and deliver it to the police chief that he can then show.
Does that have unanimous?
Be happy to do so, Mr. Mayor.
Are we unanimous?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Clayman, for reading this. The drinking and dancing establishment was Chilkoot Charlie's, and so no reason not to name them by name because they help the community when things like this happen, and they deserve the recognition. But Chief Smith, could you come forward and give us just a brief update on Officer Allen's condition, just so everybody has the latest information?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chairman, he is on the mend. He continues through follow-up surgeries and such. He's still in the hospital, but he is resolved to come back to full duty. He has a long road, frankly, ahead of him to that end, but he's resolved to do so, and if anyone can, he can.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Ostrander?
Chief, is there anything that the community can do to help in this situation at this time that you'd like to broadcast out?
Well, thank you, ma'am. The community is doing it, in fact. The first and foremost way is to continue to help us, to bring forth any information, and if anybody thinks that they may have seen anything, heard anything at all, but perhaps dismiss it as maybe, not part of it or not important, please don't doubt yourself and to call it in. We do have a tip line established. It has been widely published. I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. I believe it's 786-8660. If not, you can call into 786-8900 and be referred to that, to the tip line. But please, the information is the most important. We actively follow up, review, and follow up every single lead that comes in. And everything else is very much appreciated in concert with, as reflected, in the resolution. The community has been wonderful. It's been overwhelming, very moving, very meaningful to Officer Allen, his family, and the rest of the APD family, frankly. We have a wonderful community. We know that, and the articulation and manifestation of that has been overwhelming in this time, and we very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dr. Selcraig?
What's the total amount of reward for somebody who turns in this person at this point? Do you know?
Right. Currently, I believe it stands at $10,000. As additional monies come in, that's being reassessed, especially as time goes on, without some kind of tip that has led to an arrest, which is for the most part the threshold, a tip in actions toward an arrest. And so that's being reviewed on a daily basis, but currently I believe it stands at $10,000.
Does that include the $10,000 that the mayor's office has put in? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I believe it does.
So it's fixed at that now? It might be worthwhile to make that bigger. Thank you.
Right, that's being reviewed as monies are accumulated.
I think we can look at that.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Chief, for that update. Much appreciated. We need. Is there any objection to approval of that resolution? Seeing and hearing none, that is approved. We're at 9 Delta 1.
Move to approve.
I'm going to hand the gavel over to Mr. Gutierrez. Chair too, okay.
Mr. Flynn, I believe you wish to declare a conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the licenses here is for the Snow City Cafe. I am a shareholder in that establishment and therefore part owner of this liquor license and feel I should be excluded from participation on that specific license.
Mr. Chairman, would you like a motion to bifurcate?
Do we need a motion to bifurcate? I don't think we thank you, but I don't believe we need a motion to bifurcate at this point. Mr. Flynn, I am going to rule that you do have a conflict, and you will be shown as abstaining on the vote on that particular item, but on the rest, you will be allowed to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so it's been moved and seconded. What is the wish of the body? Or is there any objection to approval?
None.
With noting the conflict that Mr. Flynn has? All right, with that it is approved. That was easy.
That brings us to item 9, Echo 1, Dr. Selcraig.
I've had several calls on...
Move
to approve.
Thank you.
Accept.
I move to accept. Thank you very much. I've had several calls on this item today, people wanting to know how they could make comments, and it seems to me that if we just postpone it until our next meeting, February 2nd. It'll give an opportunity for the public to provide us comment by email, and we can move from there after we review this, or it'll give us an opportunity to talk about it a little bit with a little more information on the table.
Was that a motion, Dr. Selkirk?
Yes. I'd like to move this till February 2nd and talk about it then.
Will you press your button, please? Is there a second?
I seconded.
Thank you. Ms. Osiander?
I'm a little bit reticent because it appears that the February 2nd agenda is now going to be very full. There's multiple and competing bond propositions. There's a number of issues. Since the desire is merely to have time to accept emails, and this is an informational report, we can accept emails if we accept it now or not. I don't see that it makes any difference one way or the other. We're just accepting a report that we can talk about everywhere if we want. So I don't quite see what it's going to accomplish.
Hey, Ms. Osiander?
I think that it just gives the public an opportunity to provide us with some information. It gives us an opportunity to respond both to the report and the information that we see all in one setting. And this is here for us to review as a body. And I don't think that it'll take a great deal of time. If you would prefer to do this on the 16th instead of the 2nd, I'm happy to do that. But I do think that it would be worthwhile postponing it and giving us a chance to hear from the public so that when we accept this, we're better informed and we might want to formally make comments to the administration.
And just to clarify, Ms. Osiander, if we do postpone action on this item, there would not be a public hearing. It would simply be back before us as a consent item.
Right. That's why I wondered what the benefit of postponement was.
Yep. I understand. Okay. Is there objection to the motion?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Anybody speaking? Okay. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please? The motion on the table, by the way, is to postpone acceptance of this item until February 2nd.
Mr. Coffey?
No.
Ms. Osiander?
No.
Mr. Starr? No. Mr. Clayman?
Yes.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Gutierrez?
Yes.
Mr. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Johnston?
No.
Ms. Drummond?
Yes.
Dr. Selkirk?
Yes.
Mr. Birch? Repeat that. Mr. Birch?
I think he said yes. I thought it was.
Okay. Mr. Birch was a no, a loud no that time. And that motion passed.
That was the last item we had on the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of personal privilege.
Go ahead, then.
I'd like for us to take a moment of silence considering the situation in Haiti. It's very, very devastating, and there are some Americans over there, too. I think the number was 5,500, and the number of dead, I think the newspaper said, is 200,000. It's quite devastating, and I really would appreciate it if we would just take a moment of silence, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray Jackson. That brings us to our item 11A, which we can actually take up prior to 6 p.m. So, Ms. Gray Jackson, there is a motion on the floor at this point. Your state of preference.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to postpone
Just a minute.
action until the meeting of February 2nd.
Is there a second? Thank you very much, Mr. Gutierrez. Is there objection to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. This item will appear before us on February 16. That brings us to continued public hearings, which by charter cannot commence prior to...
Chairman?
Yes.
That was February 2nd.
Oh, February 2nd?
February 2nd, yes.
I think I should announce that. Is that
Oh.
in the public record?
I'm sorry. I thought we were going to do the 16th. Did I misunderstand?
That's what you announced, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman, was the 16th.
We were going to,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Matt, let me clarify. We had, after our work session on Friday, recognizing the amount of effort that needed to be taken on, we'll call it the partner legislation, we went into the 16th.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 16th is fine with me.
Okay. All right, thank you. And there's no objection to the 16th? All right, seeing and hearing none. We are now at the items that cannot begin prior to 6 p.m. It's currently 5:40 p.m., so we'll stand in recess for 20 minutes.
I think.
Are you ready, Barbara? I did forget before the break to ask for a motion for a fine for the administration member whose cell phone went off in the middle of our meeting, but since I failed to do that during the consent agenda, we'll move right along. We are at item 13A. Mr. Clayman. We're going to open the public hearing on this. This is ordinance 2009-115, dealing with reports and audits. Just to reiterate what I had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the intent is to continue the public hearing to our February 16 meeting. You're welcome to speak now, but there's quite a few homework assignments that will result in I suspect, vastly different draft. But if you do wish to speak your piece, now's an opportunity. With that, the public hearing is now open. Does anybody wish to speak to this matter? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is now closed.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I would move to continue the public hearing until February 16.
Second.
Is there any objection to continuing the public hearing on this matter? Seeing and hearing none, this matter is continued to February 16.
And, Mr. Chair, I would just note that, as the Chair is very much aware, there's a revised version that we were discussing at the work session last Friday. I expect that will look different by the time the 16th rolls around.
I expect so. All right. We are now on item 13B. This is the rezone on Muldoon Road, Anchorage Ordinance 2009-55 for the car wash, which we have only seen, I think, a half dozen times so far.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I've been declared, because I happen to have the temerity to own property somewhere in the vicinity, I've been declared to have a conflict, so I'll excuse myself, if I might.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coffey. You're excused during the deliberations of the subject. The public hearing on this matter is now open. Is there anybody who wishes to testify about this matter? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing on this issue is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Second.
Okay, the issue is, we've got thank you, Ms. Oceaner. Mr. Gutierrez, Ms. Oceaner, you wish to speak?
I talked to the applicant of this several times, and he told me that he wanted a time to meet with the mayor and the planning department. I don't know if that's occurred. Do we know, Ms. Weaver? Has he not met with you? He basically understood there were problems with this, but he wanted some suggestion from the city about alternatives, and I was hoping there'd been a chance for that to occur.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Oceaner, we've now talked to Mr. Baumhoff in quite a few months now. We'd certainly, talk to him about his request, certainly.
Okay. Well, at this point, I think even Mr. Baumhoff acknowledged to me that there were difficulties with this particular approach. The frustration is the lot is now inappropriately zoned. I know Dr. Selcraig has been working or trying to work on some alternative here too, but because of the way this is structured, I don't feel like I can support it as is. But would encourage the administration and Mr. Baumhoff, if he's listening, to try again in a way to make this a usable property.
Thank you, Ms. Oceander. Before we move on, Mr. Weaver, a little guidance here. Would this be a good one to postpone indefinitely and maybe come back to, just so we can make this quick?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I'd recommend, that you do postpone indefinitely, that if Mr. Baumhoff wants to pursue this further, it will have to be substantially revised request.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Dr. Selcraig?
I would support the motion to postpone it indefinitely.
Okay. Okay, I need to make that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I thought you did. I'm sorry, you can't. I move to postpone this indefinitely.
Second.
I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this. The situation is it's a piece of property on Muldoon Road that would make sense as a commercial piece, but it's not a big enough piece to rezone to commercial, and it involves rezoning someone else's land. And I think that it's not resolvable at this point, and it would probably take an ordinance change or some sort of significant opportunity that doesn't exist today to make this work. So, and it's truly not supported by the community itself. So I urge a yes vote on postponing it indefinitely.
Thank you, Dr. Selkirk. Mr. Gutierrez.
I would also urge a yes vote. I just would like to also point out, I note that this document originally came before us April 14th of 2009. That was quite some time ago, and we at one point had in code a provision that would have prevented something like this from just dragging on forever. That was the Wood Amendment. We got rid of the Wood Amendment in 2008. At the time, I argued against it, and this is precisely the kind of case of why I argued against eliminating the Wood Amendment. And I think it would behoove this body to consider that again, because we've got stuff that's just lingering out there forever with no resolution, and I don't think that's good public policy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Gutierrez. Is there any, seeing no one else in the queue, is there objection to indefinite postponement?
Mr. Chairman, I believe there may be somebody here who was planning to testify. Isn't this a continued public hearing?
We opened the public hearing and closed the public
hearing.
hearing.
I'm sorry. I just noticed the gentleman down there who may have had the intent to testify.
Is there any objection to the motion for indefinite postponement? Seeing and hearing none, that motion is approved. Someone please get Mr. Coffey back in here. I believe he's up next. The public hearing on Ordinance 2009-114. This is Title 21, Chapter 7, involving transportation and connectivity, neighborhood protection standards, landscaping, screening, and fences, off-street parking and loading, and exterior lighting is now before us. Anyone wishing to testify in this matter, please come on down. Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing on this matter is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you very much. Anybody need to go in the queue here?
Yeah.
Mr. Coffey? Oh.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. A couple of parts to this. I hope that everyone has the version that's dated on the bottom, January 19th, 2010, the lower right-hand corner. There have been many drafts that have come forward. I just want to make sure we all have that one.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Ms. Osiander. Sorry, were you not done?
I just wanted to be clearer, too, that this is the pink version, 13C, that was moved.
Right.
Thank you.
What are we going to do? Have you looked at these?
Go ahead, Mr. Coffey, and then I do have some minutes.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think we have 3 or 4 amendments, and I would urge those who have them to come forward, Ms. Osiander being one. So.
Okay. Well, we'll start with Ms. Osiander then. Ms. Osiander, I believe the amendments are just the ones you just passed out, correct?
Right. I'm hoping they've gone all the way down. Dr. Selkirk, do you have the amendments?
Yes.
All right. And does the administration? I talked about these with Erica earlier. All right. There are 3 amendments before you. I'll move first number 1, which is on page 15, line 14, table 21.07-6, increase in parking lot interior landscaping. It would change the current 12 in 111 to 125% to 10, and under the greater than 125%, it would change the 15 to 13.
Second. Push the button, Deb.
I'm sorry. We've had a lot of discussion in committee about the relative balance of cost impact for the additional landscaping and pedestrian amenities and snow storage that we've required on site. We've gotten a pretty good show, I think, from interested members of the public, but we received, I think, a pretty significant analysis of the economic impact of some of the changes on specific sites from a local architect at our last meeting. And his concern, and it was echoed by Mr. Ferguson, who works with Alaska General Contractors, is that the increase in landscaping could very well cause us to have to either A, build smaller buildings in the future, or B, have increased costs for development of existing sites. They asked that there be a more significant reduction in interior landscaping than the committee was willing to support. What I'm proposing here is a little bit less reduction than is in the draft, but not as much as was requested of us. Basically, this is for, we've put an upper limit in this draft on how big parking lots can be, and these are for those exceptions when there's a specific reason for asking for an even bigger parking lot than the top limit. And so if your parking lot is 111 to 125% bigger than required, you would have to have 10% additional interior landscaping under this amendment. Urge support.
Thank you, Ms. Osiander. Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. What we've tried to do, and I think every committee member's tried to do this, is get a balance between the benefits of enhanced visual appearance associated with perimeter and interior landscaping, and on the other hand, the costs attendant upon doing that. And one of the big drivers was, as Debbie indicated, Ms. Osiander indicated, is a reduction in total parking requirements, but then increased requirements on the other. There's no bright line here, folks. It's difficult. It's easy to say it's $30 a square foot for commercial land, multiply that times whatever, and you get a cost. It's much more difficult to look at the other side and quantify in the same fashion a benefit. My view is that with the substantial changes that we're making across parking, we may see changes in these provisions over time. But right now, I would rather go toward the requirements of lower total parking requirements and not eliminate interior landscape and not reduce it in the standard case, but in the oversized case, to bring it back just a little, because the increases go from 10 to 12 and 10 to 15, which are incrementally substantial. So I like what Ms. Osiander said about not going as far as the staff recommended and not bringing it back to the level that the AGCs and the others, the architects, were arguing for, but pick a middle ground. For the reasons that Ms. Osiander stated and those, I'm going to support the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Dr. Selcraig.
Ms. Osiander and Mr. Coffey characterize our discussion pretty well. I think we are working to try to find a middle way. I am not going to support this, mostly because what this does is it reduces the additional parking requirements for those oversized properties like Walmart. So that when you're talking about, you're looking at the greater than 100 or greater than 125. And actually, it's my understanding that this also would apply to those people who exceeded their required number. Can I check with staff? How would you interpret this?
Yes, through the chair, this would apply only to those cases where the applicant is proposing to provide 111%, meaning at least 11% more parking than would be required of them.
So it's like Walmart added extra parking, and it's, in my opinion, it's those kinds of places particularly that need to be landscaped, because we end up with these kind of vast fields of concrete, and they're really awful. One of the things we talked about, and I think we may come back and talk to this body about, is perhaps allowing their snow storage area to count as parking spaces. Or we had some discussion about some of the kind of edged exterior areas that are involved in the landscaping to count as landscaping so that it wouldn't take up parking spaces. So I'm happy to talk about other approaches, but I don't think that this is a very good approach. I think in the end we'd find ourselves with oversized parking lots that weren't landscaped, and I think we really want to, as well as they could be, and I think we want to move away from that. And, I think the staff has done a good job coming up with a compromise already, so thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selcraig. Ms. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to check with the staff on what is the current required level of landscaping in large parking lots like this that we're changing from?
Through the chair, Ms. Drummond, 5%.
Okay, and can you give us an example of which large parking lots out there have met the 5% minimum and which have done better?
In the category of developments that have exceeded 5%, the Eagle River Fred Meyer comes in at approximately 9%. The Glen Square Mall comes in between 9 and 10%. The new Takotnu Commons is at 5%.
Okay, thank you. To the body, the Takotnu Commons, I've been out there a number of times. I'm really grateful that Target has moved into our community. Keeps me from dragging things back from Seattle, but that is one endless sea of asphalt. The only relief is the drainage pattern that brings that road up and down. That you have to drive miles. I think I looked at my car's odometer when I first saw the Target sign on the Glen Highway, and by the time I pulled in front of Target, it was 2.5 miles later. That's how big the parking lot and the approaches and all that stuff is to get there from off of the highway. But I think that we need to do a whole lot better, especially if developers are looking to exceed parking. This is about exceeding the minimum required number of parking spaces. This is not about average small parking lots. The committee had a ton of discussion and a lot of detail with architects and developers on smaller parking lots with average size office buildings that require, 60 to 70 to 100 parking spaces. We have not had a lot of complaint that I can recall on the minimum. What the purpose of this is to discourage building oversized parking lots that are never used. I mean, we all know that Walmart never fills all those parking spaces, and all we've got is tons of asphalt and a lot of drainage issues as a result, and a lot of ugly. So I'm not going to support this amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Drummond. Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the last few comments kind of helped crystallize my thinking. I was unsure what these percentages were, but if I'm understanding correctly, we're talking the 111 to 125% means a parking lot that is in excess of what is required by code for that particular statute. And if you're building these humongous parking lots that are so vastly larger than you're required to, it just seems to me that what we need is more landscaping and not less. So I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Ms. Osiander.
I just want to clarify, this is more landscaping. Basically, right now, it's a 5%. This doubles it. And it's for the larger lots, which do need more landscaping. The concern is, particularly as we add increases for other items, that the economic impact is not too great. I would suggest that we do this incrementally and see. I absolutely agree. The bigger parking lots do need more interior landscaping. We're doubling here. Do we need to do more than doubling? And then if it's even a bigger lot, we're going up to 13%. So it seems reasonable to me.
Thank you, Ms. Osiander. Mr. Coffey.
Yeah, I wanted to just go back to what we require in a standard parking lot. 40 to 70 is 5% of the interior. 71 to 100 is 7.5% of the interior. More than 100 is 10% of the interior of a parking spot. Parking, as I understand it, takes up 200 square feet. So that means if you have 100 parking spots, you have taken up 20,000 square feet of land, and you have to devote 10% or 2,000 square feet to landscaping already. Now, they would take it up by 20% more in the large lots. So you'd go to, instead of having 2,000, you'd have 20% more, which is 400 more square feet. And you see where I come in with this cost sort of benefit thing, and then you say $30 to $50 a square foot, you're talking about a fair amount of money. And if you go to 15, you do the same thing. On the other hand, if you adopt the amendments as I understand them to be intended, then you don't have those incremental increases quite as high and don't put quite as much cost, but you do get more. And I'm sorry, the justification for larger than average parking lots is a separate standard for doing that, and the idea that we're going to use landscaping requirements to prevent this from happening flies in the face of the standards which allow it to happen in the first instance. It's extra need that is demonstrated. So you don't punish someone for meeting an extra need if they meet those standards by raising the landscaping. That's the wrong way to legislate. What you need to decide, though, really, and this is what it comes down to, is this amorphous and difficult issue of balancing costs with what could be more attractive than would otherwise be there. And if the costs are less important to you and the attractiveness is more, then don't vote. If you're more concerned about the costs, then you might want to think about stepping it down, not completely as they asked, but somewhat. So I support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Dr. Selcraig.
Could the staff provide us, what's the criteria for if somebody wants to oversize a parking lot? What do they have to do? What are the requirements associated with it?
Yes, through the Chair, Ms. Selcraig. There are no requirements. The minimum parking requirement is only a minimum, and the applicant is welcome to provide more spaces than the minimum by right, up to the maximum stated here on this page. So up to this maximum amount of one parking space per 250 feet of gross floor area, or up to 125 of the minimum number of parking spaces. For example, Walmart's required to have a minimum of 3 spaces per, a minimum of about 3.3 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Or, in other words, 1 parking space per 300 square feet. Walmart is welcome to take that 3.3 spaces per 1,000 square feet and change that to basically 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet up to the maximum. But they actually can go a little higher because of that 125% rule. They can get a little bit further. What the parking data tell us is that they really don't need that much more. They don't really need much more than 115, 125%. And so we don't anticipate very many parking lots, for example, greater than, in the second row of this table, greater than 125% of the minimum. We don't really anticipate seeing that very often.
Thank you. Well, it seems to me that when we value our land and we recognize that we have limited amount of land in this bowl, and that we're moving towards encouraging more compact development, that it's perfectly reasonable to have some small disincentives in place for people to build parking lots that are bigger than they really need to be. And I think that that's the sentiment behind this. I think also it results in the parking lots that are great big being more attractive for the community. So I would just discourage a no vote on this. Thank you. Encourage a no vote.
Thank you, Dr. Selcraig. Seeing nobody else in the queue, Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on amendment number 1? Amendment number a yes vote adopts standards in Minnesota Standards Amendment. A no vote leaves them as they are in the draft that you have before you.
Ms. Johnston?
Yes.
Ms. Drummond?
No.
Dr. Selcraig?
No.
Mr. Birch? I believe is... Okay, yes? Okay. Mr. Coffey? Ms. Osiander? Mr. Starr?
Yes.
Mr. Clayman?
No.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
No.
Mr. Gutierrez?
No.
Mr. Flynn?
Yes.
Those passed 6-5.
Okay. Ms. Osiander?
Amendment number 2 is on page 30, line 18. This is under the section called Relationship to Buildings. If you note there's a non-residential and a residential. My amendment is only for the non-residential. Basically, it would read, parking spaces and parking aisles shall be separated from any non-residential building by a walkway or site enhancement, landscaping, planting area, or both of at least, and it currently reads 5, and my amendment would say 4 feet in width.
Second.
this basically keeps it at the current level for non-residential buildings. We had a lot of discussion on this in committee, too, and I support and understand, accept the increased width for residential, but it seems to me that we need to move a little slower here, and basically the rationale is the same. Let's wait and see what the cost impact is once we finally decide what we're going to do with the snow removal requirement, and then if it's needed, we can increase the width. We heard some pretty passionate comments from private industry folks that 5 foot was not needed for a walkway and it's just going to increase the site cost development.
Dr. Selcraig? Oh, do we have a second to that motion?
Yes, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Dr. Selcraig?
I'd like to hear staff's comment on this.
I did it.
Yes, through the chair, Ms. Selcraig. The standard for a sidewalk is 5 feet because that's what allows two people to either walk side by side comfortably or to pass one another going the opposite directions. And so where there is a sidewalk required, the recommendation would be that there be that minimum width. For the landscaping side, it also says there's a landscaping option. And the 5 feet is better than 4 feet. For example, if you're going to have trees, you preferably have 8 feet. But if you have tall shrubs or trees, 5 feet is certainly better than 4. That was the thinking behind that width.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selcraig. Mr. Gutierrez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given that, I don't think I'm going to support this amendment because if we have sidewalks at 5 feet so that two people can walk side by side or so that two people can pass in the opposite direction, it doesn't seem to make any sense to say that that's okay for some sidewalks and not for others. If the point of having a sidewalk is to have those things, if it's in a commercial area, then we don't want two people to be able to pass side by side, or we don't want people to be able to walk next to one another. It just doesn't make much sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gutierrez. Ms. Osiander?
If I could clarify, I'm not meaning to change the requirements for sidewalk width. This is merely a standard from how far parking spaces and aisles have to be from the building. So if there's going to be in the plan a sidewalk, then it would follow the requirements for a sidewalk. This language merely calls for required separation from the building. And my understanding is it's currently 4 feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. And again, cost benefit. If you've got 4 feet of planting beds along the edge of the building, and you're using that for your separation and so on, what do we gain when the staff says it's better if it's 5 feet? Well, if it's 100 feet, it's a foot wide, and it's $30 a foot, there's your cost. What's better? I don't know. I don't know why 4 feet doesn't work, or 5 feet, or 6 feet, or any other arbitrary number. But what we've done is we've reduced the parking. We've clearly done that. And then we have incrementally added a lot of things, which are very difficult to quantify and to measure in terms of benefit as well as cost. And I mean the menu list is long about what your required parking is, and it depends on whether you're on a transit corridor and whether you're senior housing or all of these variables. And to incrementally increase so many of these other requirements is worrisome to me because it does impose a cost. And people keep talking about keeping things smaller, parking lots and all of this stuff. And when we got the AGC analysis on the impact, what do they call it? It's an environmental impact statement. It's an economic impact statement. It was pretty clear from the analysis done by architects in response to the one that was done by staff that, in fact, we are oftentimes increasing the total demand, the total land needed to meet all these requirements. I want to back off incrementally and leave it at the current standard, and I'm supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Mr. Starr?
I'm going to support it as well, and I think, listening to the design professionals in this town, what they're tasked with is providing safe egress and traffic flow patterns. And the farther you bring the cars away from the building means that they have challenges with the flow of the traffic in the aisle widths. And there's a nice table and graph in here that speaks to angled parking versus parallel parking. And when you're getting into 22.5-foot aisle widths and less, or in other cases 24-foot, you guys have all been in those parking lots that have that narrowed aisle width, and when you take away the ability for the developer to get the cars closer to the building, nosed-in parking, if you will, then he's going to compromise. He's going to take it away from things that are good for public safety, which are aisle widths that are wider. 24 feet in this town is awfully tight for the type of vehicles that we have. The double extended cab pickup trucks, the Tundras, the Suburbans, the other things, and you frustrate the developers and you frustrate the users of those parking lots when you continue to force it away. And there's only so many chunks of land that are going to have that much space. And the tight developments, the in-building that Dr. Selkirk talks about, you take away more of the square footage for vehicular traffic, you're going to run into more problems. And just do lines on a page or walk some of these footprints, and you'll see the frustration that continuing to force those cars away from the building is going to cause. So I want to support the amendment, and I appreciate the input from the professionals that told us to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Ms. Drummond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My concern is that vehicle overhangs tend to intrude on these spaces, and the narrower you make them, the more likely it is that you won't be able to walk on these paths because the size of our vehicles is so large that they overhang these and you can't walk. I will be supporting the document as written and not the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Drummond. Dr. Selkirk.
So I just want to clarify with staff. What we're looking at here is if you have a non-residential building and a parking lot, you're looking at the separation between that non-residential building and the parking lot as either 5 feet or 4 feet? Or is there a mandatory landscape strip in there anyhow?
Through the chair, we are looking at the space between the parking space and the building.
So if I happen to have a non-residential building with a big window, what I'm looking at, I'm either looking at a 4-foot sidewalk in the front of a car, a 5-foot sidewalk in the front of a car, or a 5-foot landscape strip in the front of a car. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. It's a choice between the two.
And does that 4 feet include the potential hangover of the front end of the car?
No, it does not. There is a 2-foot overhang provision, so it would not include overhang.
So the distance between the car and the actual car hangover, so that secures at least a 5-foot distance between the front of the car and the building? I mean, assuming that plus, if you count the 2 feet as covering the front of the car.
Correct. That's correct. It would be 5 feet between the car and the building.
I just have to say, these are the kind of things we do at the Title 21. I mean, this is the kind of stuff we sit around and talk about. And it is hard. It is not an easy process to decide whether the 5 or the 4 is the correct amount. And I am completely sensitive to the issues that Mr. Coffey raises regarding the cost of things. So really what we have is we don't really have 5 feet, we have 7 feet. We're talking about 7 feet here. That's the first thing that I think we have to recognize. And so if we reduce this, we'll then be talking about 6 feet. Is that correct?
Yes, from the curb, from the wheels, there would be 6 feet.
Okay. I am going to support this. I'm going to support this because I think it's an either-or, and I am present in the room when we're talking about the overall cost. I'm really sorry we didn't support the last one. I think it was a much more significant issue than this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selkirk. And by the way, this is why I genuflect every Thursday morning. Mr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The humor was getting to me.
Sorry.
I'd like to know if the administration, aside from staff, has a comment for us on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support the amendment. We think that's probably a fair number that's been proposed there. We can live with that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Clayman.
There's all this talk of hangover, and we haven't even gotten to the liquor part of the... From planning staff, what is the recommendation now? I've now heard the mayor weigh in. What is the planning staff's recommendation about this proposed amendment?
Through the chair, the recommendation would be where there's a required walkway that there be 5 feet wide, and where there's not a required walkway that you would have at least a 4 feet distance. And in some cases, this won't cover areas that are required walkways. So
in other words, if there's a required walkway, this 4-foot rule would not apply. I see Mr. Jones nodding his head. And if there's not a required walkway, then they could have a 4 feet space. If this passes. Mr. Jones.
Through the chair, Mr. Clayman, my understanding is the amendment would not affect the standards when a walkway when there was a required sidewalk. So if there's a required sidewalk, the sidewalk standards apply, and it's going to be 5 feet. If there's not a sidewalk, then the amendment would bring it to 4 feet, and I believe the staff has indicated that's fine with them.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Selcrag.
No comment.
Okay. Anybody else in the queue? Objection to the amendment? Seeing and hearing none, that amendment is approved. Ms. This would be fast, right?
Yep.
Go ahead, Ms. Osiander.
And this is the amendment that was passed out on a separate sheet of paper.
Okay, would you please move it?
It's called Assembly Committee Amendment 7-2BD. It's on page 20.
May we have a motion, Ms. Osiander?
Well, I was going to read it.
Okay, that's fine.
Would that be all right?
Well, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. For senior housing, to add the sentence that say, dwelling units that meet the definition of senior housing are eligible for a reduction of up to 15% of the minimum number of required parking spaces.
Second.
We had a lot of discussion about how much parking different uses required. We have amended the tables multiple times in committee. One of the last discussions we had just last week was about the impact of senior housing and the difference between the senior housing definition in this document and the federal government's definition of senior housing, which is down to, I hate to tell you, the age 55, even though our document talks about older people than that. So we
My
asked,
age, just to be clear, okay?
we asked staff if they thought it was reasonable to add an additional requirement for the more general senior housing, which would go down to age 55, and they came up with this language. And so I'm going to ask that it be approved.
Thank you, Ms. Osiander. And if it makes you feel any better, I think at one point I learned if you're 50 years old, you're considered historic in the eyes of the Alaska State Historic Preservation Office. So.
That's not reassuring.
Moving right along, Dr. Selcrag.
Mike?
I'd like to hear from staff on this.
They wrote it.
You're comfortable with it? You prepared it for us. Did you have any comments? Okay. I'm going to be supporting this. It's just a practical thing to do, and for all the reasons that Ms. Osiander listed, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Dr. Selcrag. Mr. Coffey.
Very briefly, this is the kind of a good amendment that comes out of the fact that there's 5 of us sitting there for 2 hours every Thursday. We started to wonder, wait a minute, what are the driving habits of people in certain age groups? And this is the result of that discussion, and it's based on reality, which is good, we believe, and therefore I think we should all be supportive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Mr. Starr.
Could I just have an update on where the snow storage debate and the discussions are at in conjunction with that? I'm not sure where we're headed with those and how they're going to be impacted on that. Do we have snow storage requirements coming down the pike as well?
Come see us Thursday. We're talking about it for the first hour, Mr. Starr.
Well, my point in that is we're getting pretty elaborate with the approvals of the requirements, and then, I don't want to mislead the folks as to what's transpiring. We're going to change the whole dynamics as well of that, and it's great to give parking credits to the senior group, but are we going to force them to haul their own snow now? I mean, then you're saying, oh, great, but then you just increase the cost of living for a fixed income folks, a bundle by requiring dump trucks to show up at 2 o'clock in the morning and haul their snow. And I don't want to get sucked into the Thursday diatribes that go on, but I'd like to.
Diatribes.
Oh, you all get along?
Yeah, perfectly.
Well, it's trying to put the point forward is that there's more to discuss on this whole topic as it relates to what we're going to require the folks to do with snow clearing and snow storage.
Thank you, Mr. Starr. Mr. Coffey?
Well, there is a document that will give you some indication of the depth and breadth of our work. It is document 7.2.x. And we labeled them. We started with A. We're now on X and beyond. It's Tom, Eric, is it available on the web if people want to read it before we talk about it? Because we're going to bring it up next week. It's the first hour of discussion. And we're seriously concerned about how much land we require for snow storage and hauling and all of that thing, for the reasons that everybody's identified. But is it available? Thank you. So here it is, 7.2.x.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey. Okay. Seeing no one else in the queue, is there objection to amendment number 3? Seeing and hearing none, that one is approved. With that, we have Chapter 7 before us as amended. I believe we had a motion already on the table. So, discussion on Chapter 7. Mr. Coffey.
Like all the others, it's provisionally adopted. There's some sections reserved and some stuff that will still have to be done. But I think the committee has done good work, and I think it's bringing to you a product that, as best we can do, balances the various demands and needs. I would urge support for its provisional adoption. Thank you.
Seeing and hearing no one else in the queue, is there objection to adopting Chapter 7? With that, Chapter 7 is adopted.
No, Section 100 of Chapter 7.
All right, Section 100.
Thank you.
Yeah, my apologies.
And it's provisionally adopted like the rest of them, right, Mr. Chairman?
90, too. It's 90.
What did I say?
You said 100. 100 is reserved.
Yeah, my mistake. It's 90, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. With that,
100 is reserved.
Section 90 of Chapter 7 is provisionally adopted. Moving right along, the last item on our agenda this evening is item 14A. This is Ordinance 2009-143. This is the 100% identification check for on-premises sales by packaged liquor store licensees. Just as a reminder of what I mentioned earlier, I believe Mr. Gutierrez and others are working on some amendments to this. However, the public hearing is now open. You're welcome to come testify in this matter, or if you wish to wait until February 2nd when we take it up again, you may do so, but you only get to speak once. So with that, the public hearing is now open.
Mr. Flynn, while they're coming down, I want to say a special thank you to Tom Davis and Erica McConnell on Title 21, the Planning Department staff. I know I've been going to Title 21 meetings, I think, every week since I've been on the Assembly, and Erica's been doing it far longer. And sometimes it gets frustrating and difficult, and I really greatly appreciate both of them. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ms. Dr. Selkirk.
Actually, I was just walking down there to personally thank Erica. I can't think of a more dedicated public servant than the public servants we have in these planning department. I mean, and they put up with us. I mean, we are nitpicky. We change our minds. They have good reasons for things. We ask lots of questions, and they continually defend the public comment that they've gotten, the Planning and Zoning Commission's position, the Title 21 the 2020, our comp plan requirements. I mean, they are continually speaking for people who aren't in the room and reminding us that we're not the only people in the world. And, of course, we bring in a whole sea of other people for them to talk to. So I really think they deserve a great a great deal of appreciation. And thank you, Ms. Osiander, for raising it. I was just going to go shake Erica's hand tonight, but...
Okay. And I apologize, Ms. Manteuffel, there's a couple more comments on that, so if you can sit down for just a second, we'll get to you. Ms. Gray-Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Osiander, thank you for thanking the administration staff, because that brought me to wanting to thank all of my colleagues who are part of the Title 21 committee for all of your hard work and your commitment, and I really appreciate it, and I've learned a lot through your hard work and commitment, and Ms. Osiander invited me to attend the Title 21 committee meeting. I don't think so. Thank you.
I did. It's not so bad. Mr. Coffey? You're done. Okay. So thank you, Ms. Manteuffel, for your forbearance. You have 3 minutes. And please.
My name is Regina Manteuffel, and in my community council area of Fairview, we have 2 liquor stores, we have 3 bars, we have plenty of shelters that handle a lot of people with alcohol problems, and I think that everybody should be ID'd, and I think that there should be another ordinance on the side or amendment in this ordinance to make sure that the people in the shelter get new IDs also. And I know that's not covered in this one, but this is something that needs to be covered. The problem is that they come into establishments, they show their old ID without the red mark on it, or just flash it, and then they get away with it. And a lot of people have been convicted of domestic violence in relationship to alcohol. People have gone from one liquor store to another liquor store and got one to serve them when the other one wouldn't serve them. And this is a really serious problem in my community. I put on a conference and I help people straight out of different situations that they put themselves into from different treatment centers. But, as soon as life gets a little hard and gets a little tough, they want to go back and drink, or they want to go in and get that bottle or that beer, and, they have a little bit of gray hair, and, well, let's serve it to them. I mean, when I was in high school, there was a guy that had a little bit of gray hair, and he walked in and bought his booze all the time. And I think that it's about time that we put our foot down and require to check. And, it's about the safety of the community. It's about safety of children. And we have a lot of children in our community that need to be safe. And I think that we have to also, consider another thing. If I had it my way, I would have it where they walked into a liquor store, I would put an amendment to have them breathe into something before they were sold alcohol. Because a lot of times they walk in that liquor store and they have alcohol in their breath, but they keep a certain amount of distance away from the teller, and the teller can't smell it because they've kept a distance, or they ate mints or something like that, and then before you know it, they've been served. So in order to protect my community and the children in my community and the children in Fairview Elementary School, Fairview Rec Center, and Denali, and other children in other communities, we need to have this done. So I look forward to the next assembly person stepping forward and putting something for some funding to have them checked when they check into the shelters, and checking those IDs and looking them up and seeing if they've been bad or naughty or nice, as they say at Christmas time. And if they've been bad and they shouldn't have that ID, they should take it away from them, and they should have funding where they can mail it down to a certain DMV and have a check there so they can get the correct ID in order to protect our community. So I look forward to seeing an amendment that has that on there, and therefore I figured I'd come forward now.
Thank you, Ms. Manteuffel. Appreciate your comment.
Any questions?
There do not appear to be any, but thank you very much for coming down tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to talk to us about this legislation at this time? Welcome, sir.
Good evening.
Your name, please.
My name is William Harrington, and I was quoted in the Anchorage Daily News because I was at that town hall meeting, and the quote was wrong. They said that I said that there was 2% of the population that is causing the problem. The actual statistic that I used was 0.02%. I'm sure all of us that got past the 5th grade, not that we're smarter than 5th graders, but we know that that's about 100% difference, 2% versus 0.02%. This lady just had an excellent suggestion that I had certainly never thought of before, and that is putting breathalyzers in the liquor stores, requiring people to use that before they can buy. That was some good thinking. I'd like to reiterate what the Anchorage Daily News did not say that I said at the last meeting, which is, number one, alcohol is a drug. It's important to understand, alcohol is a drug, and people that are abusing it are drug abusers. Now, we know if you want to get cocaine, methamphetamine, anything else, this is all it takes, money. You don't have to have a driver's license. You don't show them nothing except the money. And when you pass this ordinance, it's going to be the money that gets those people their drug, alcohol. They don't need any, this driver's license thing is, that lady's suggestion was a whole lot better than this idea that you're going to keep people from getting alcohol because you're requiring them to show an ID. People can buy the worst drugs on earth, all with money and no ID. I think the point is, the focus needs to be on making the sellers responsible. Telling the sellers, hey, you're in business to make money, but we're not going to let you sell to these people, period. And if you do, there'll be penalties. And like the lady with the breathalyzer and, whatever it takes, where the sellers understand that they're not going to make that money off those people because those people are going to get their drug around the corner anyway, but you're not going to let it go out your front door. The other side of that is the only solution here, which is a very unpleasant solution, is to tax the sellers to provide the money for the necessary programs to deal with this serious issue. And that is why I personally believe that, let's put it this way. If I believed that what you're proposing would be effective, I'd be 100% behind it. But I think that it is so trite and ridiculous that it just misses the entire point. Thank you.
Question?
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Mr. Coffey has a question for you.
We just passed our legislative program, and it reflects a fact that I was going to ask if you knew. Several years ago, they increased the alcohol tax at the state level, and I was wondering if you knew how much of that money, additional money, went into things like you're talking about, alcohol treatment for the chronic public inebriates and on and on.
Well, let me say this. I know of one chronic inebriate who's been saved 3 different times.
Yeah.
Now, you can save that guy 3 more times, but I'll bet every dime I've got that he's going to go right back to where he is. So, no, I don't know the exact statistic. I'm just saying that without both the sellers cooperating to keep the drugs away from the people that want them and having the tax base, the money for these programs, and let me say this about alcoholics. They may be drunks, but they're not stupid. They know how to play the system probably better than any of us do. And they do play the system. So, yeah, they'll go through your programs as long as you've got money for your programs, which I'm saying make them pay forward. If that bottle of vodka is $10, make it 15, and take that extra $5 and then provide this warm place for them to sleep it off. Because I think part of the focus of all this is Anchorage doesn't want to have a bunch of frozen drunks out on the street. So if we need to provide warehousing, sleeping facilities, just put an extra $5 tax per bottle and start renting rooms for them. That way you keep the what is that, political correct?
I don't know. I've lost my political correctness.
I truly don't believe, like I said, that you are going to keep alcohol out of an individual's hands by making them show a driver's license. As I said before, you can get any drug in the world with this ID.
And the reason I asked the question is because the legislative program asked them to please use that extra tax money for precisely what you suggested. We'll see whether or not they follow our sanguine advice.
Mr. Harrington, Mr. Starr had a question, I think, or just I apologize.
I appreciate you walking back down.
I need the exercise. I'm only here for the exercise, that, and, try to practice my public speaking. You don't really think I'm stupid enough to think I'm going to make an effect.
Thanks for engaging the process. I saw you at the town hall meeting as well, and your passion in your speak. One of the statistics that's come come in front of us, and I'm not sure it's accurate, was the number of red stripe driver's licenses or ID cards in the state. We were told at our last work session by somebody that they've only issued 1,000 of these cards that have a red stripe indication either on a driver's license or a temporary ID. Do you know the number? Is there?
I wouldn't have the statistic. When it comes to the red stripe, I would have to agree that could be effective by making people show the driver's license, but as the other person just mentioned already, they got 2 or 3 IDs. They can go get another one. Plus, as I said 3 times now, it's the dollars.
Okay.
I can have a red striped ID all I want, and I can pay some other person to go buy the alcohol and give them $20, and I mean, come on, there's enough people out there that they'll go buy you a bottle of whatever, 10 or 20 of them if you got enough money.
I got it. The answer was I was looking to see how broad-based that red stripe program
But I think this lady had an excellent suggestion with the breathalyzers in the store, and I think that, like I say, putting the onus on the sellers to not sell to people who are even arrested for DUI. I think that just simply being arrested for DUI should be enough reason to be on the ban list at all liquor stores in town, as we've known from anyway.
Thank you.
Big
Mr.
issue.
Harrington.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Is there anybody else who wishes to testify tonight on this issue? Hearing no one.
Chairman, I've moved to continue the public hearing to the meeting of February 2nd.
Push the buttons, please.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just didn't hear.
Move to continue the public hearing to the meeting of February 2nd.
Okay, I will second if it hasn't been, and I have a question to ask.
It has been seconded, Mr. Coffey. Your question, please.
My question is, are we loading up the second on this with the stuff from the bonds and all of that? I'm not just, you know the agenda better than I, and I'm just curious, and that's the only question I have.
Is the question directed at me, Mr. Coffey? Okay. We have about a half dozen bond proposals that we'll be taking up, less than usual. I think we'll probably be okay. But Mr. Klayman.
Mr. Chair, is it possible to make a request that the agenda be ordered so the bond proposals be taken up before this continued public hearing?
It won't be ordered that way. What we can entertain a motion to do just that.
At the meeting?
At the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. With that, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, that public hearing is continued. That's the conclusion of our regular agenda. Do we have any special orders? Of course not. This is a time when we have a rarely held commodity of audience participation. So if there's anybody out there who'd like to give us 3 minutes of information about some topic not on our agenda. Sure. Mr. Harrington, how did I know? Please remember to state your name once again, sir.
This is something that I've wanted to address for a long time, and that is...
Your name once more, sir.
The traffic situation. And this is very interesting because in a very small way it's similar, because it's government run amok. For example, when you leave out of here, if you go this way, we now have a curb. You can't turn that way down an alley. So if you want to go to Fred Meyer, if you go out this way, you can't turn left on Denali. You have to go over there, and you go down past New Sagaya. But you can't turn left there either. And it's like, why? My point is that I think that the traffic engineers are overly concerned with adding barriers which inhibit traffic flow. Now, I'm not a small business person, but I'm a customer. And more than once, I wanted to turn into a business, and you got traffic barriers in the way. Now, maybe there was a traffic accident at that location 3 or 5 or 10 years ago, and maybe there's a reason. And certainly, but it's like, we need some judgment here, folks. I mean, can we control all the traffic with all these different barriers, which also simply turn into obstacles for the snowplow? What really shocked me this past summer, I'm over here garage sailing in the neighborhood, and this is a little neighborhood. I'm driving along. Next thing I know, here's a roundabout in this little neighborhood. It's like, what? The road out there, the main road, is pitted. It's got potholes. It's rutted. And over here, we spent $50,000 on a roundabout in the middle of, some little street. Now, here's my point. If you guys got to get rid of some people for the budget, get rid of the traffic engineers.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. All right.
Snowplows will be taking these things out soon enough, so, that'll take care of that.
Second.
Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you, folks.